Alright guys, Tactical here again, and today I wanted to talk about specialists. I know that last night Accuracy got announced to go into Splice, which is a really interesting move, but I thought I'd hold off until some more announcements come out because I don't really want to do a video on a single player when there's 3 more yet to be announced. Pretty interesting situation, but today I wanted to talk about specialists. Certainly a topic which needs to be covered in some sort of depth. This discussion, you could say, has been around since the Black Ops 3 days when they were first introduced. They come back in Infinite Warfare, of course. Some would say that we got a welcome relief from them in World War II, and then they're back in full force here in Black Ops 4. So they're almost certainly going to be in competitive play. The whole idea of moving to a 5v5 situation was to more closely align casual and competitive play. So I can say almost 99% certain they will be in some form in competitive play, and that's what I want to talk about. I'm not talking about public matches and casual play because I think a lot of people found them fun in Black Ops 3, ranking up the different characters, unlocking the gold gear for each character, but I wanted to talk about their viability in competitive play. Now, things are a little bit different in Black Ops 4 on the specialist front. We have a weapon that comes automatically with whatever specialist you choose. So you have not necessarily a weapon, but it's your main piece of kit that you come with. Then you have an equipment which you can equip also instead of a nade or a stun or a tomahawk in that kind of slot. So firstly I'll talk about the weapons and the main abilities, then we'll go on to the more equipment style things, and tweaks I think need to be made. So I don't really have a hard and fast opinion on these sort of things. I'm sure you guys will have more interesting thoughts than me in the comment section below. But I just want to say, some people would say absolutely no, specialists have no place in competitive Call of Duty, but I'm not sure that's necessarily true. If you think about Glitch, and you could say even FTL Jump from Infinite Warfare, there were so many cool plays like Facento's 1v3 on Infection, Vance's 1v2 on Hunted, of course, against elevating CoD champs. Formor had those crazy FTL jumps on Throwback. These are really memorable Call of Duty moments for me. The specialists made it really exciting, and for certain specialists, there's certainly a pretty big skill gap in terms of which players are good with it and which players aren't. And the ability of specialists to add making really cool plays to the Call of Duty repertoire is something that I quite enjoy to an extent. Now, of course, there are many specialists which are frankly ridiculous. Heatwave from Black Ops 3 and Active Camo from Infinite Warfare especially were simply on another level, and I don't really see too many defenses of these being allowed in competitive play. Heatwave and Camo were effectively a guaranteed kill. You could say to some extent there's a skill gap. For example, with Heatwave, the better player will use it in the better circumstance, but as I'll go on to say, I don't think that's enough of a reason to say that it's viable in competitive play. It seems to me to have the same skill gap as something like a Claymore or a Trip Mine. Yes, you can place the Claymore in an intelligent position and there's a skill gap in putting it in a good place, but actually achieving the kill that comes from it takes no skill at all. I feel like it's the same thing with Heatwave and Camo really. And for that reason I don't think they're good, but on the whole I think specialists could have some place in Call of Duty, and I wanted to see if there's some sort of balance we can reach which will make things better for everyone. So firstly I want to go over my quick reasoning for why I think Scorestreaks are a good addition to the game. So Scorestreaks and specialists are in some senses quite similar, but I think Scorestreaks really do have a place in Call of Duty, as has been proven over many years. And I'm not convinced that the reasoning that makes Scorestreaks viable can also be applied to specialists in the wider sense. So Scorestreaks, I think most of you guys would agree that they have been a good addition to Call of Duty, but of course not all of them are good. The UAV, the Orbital VSAT, the Hater, these things obviously aren't viable, but something like a Lightning Strike, a Hellstorm, maybe an HC car, has definitely earned its place, I feel, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, you've got a skill gap in acquiring the score streak, and secondly, you have a skill gap in using it. So, in acquiring the streak, there's a skill gap in terms of not only individually, the better players will go on longer streaks to acquire the score streaks, also there's a team play skill gap, in that if your team communicates well, and the player that's close to streaks, they get one of their teammates to bait for them, using good communication, then the better teams are more often going to get more score streaks than the lesser teams. It also creates a trade-off between playing the objective and getting kills. So for example, if you're already close to streaks, you probably don't want to get in the hill, you want to prioritize kills more, or do you take the risk that you run into the hill and get the kill, and you'll get not only the kill but also the capture points to get yourself the streaks. So in earning the streaks, there's a lot of trade-offs and there's a lot of skill gaps, not only individually but also in terms of team play. And in using the streak, there's also a skill gap. You call in a lightning strike, you see all 4, or now 5 I guess you could say, enemy positions on the map. You've got to call out what the most important ones are to your team on a really quick basis. You've got to decide which target is the most important. These are things that the better, most experienced players will nail compared to your average public match guy. Importantly for the Scorestreaks though, they need to have some sort of downside if you use them poorly. So a lightning strike, if you call in a bad lightning strike, you could kill your teammates and spawn yourselves out. Something like a UAV, there is literally no skill in using it. You call it in, it shows on the minimap where all the enemies are. It doesn't require any communication from yourself, doesn't require any skill to use it. It's going to be the same effect regardless, which is why I think something like that really doesn't have a place. In addition to how valuable that kind of information is in a competitive setting for how much a UAV costs. So hopefully you find that reasoning somewhat convincing that a skill gap in attaining and a skill gap in using certain score streaks can make them viable. Now, can we apply the same thing to specialists? There really isn't much skill gap in terms of earning the specialist. The fact that it's effectively like a support streak from previous Call of Duties, where you get points for kills and objective-based work, but your score never goes down when you die, so you're always working towards the specialist. So there's no trade-off in terms of playing for objective or playing for kills. You just play a normal Call of Duty game, you'll get the specialist eventually. You don't have to worry about team play, coordination, or anything like that in acquiring the specialist. It was like in Infinite Warfare. Disappointingly, I think that active camo was of course ridiculous, it made you completely invisible, but there was a skill gap, especially in uplink, in terms of the player on your team that would almost always guarantee a 2-point play from the use of camo, compared to the player that wouldn't always do that. But unfortunately, camo took quite a long time to earn, and some of the players that were really good at using it, they weren't as good at acquiring it because they played a more difficult role. The assault rifles in Infinite Warfare dominated the game. Formal, for example, on Optic, they never really gave him the camo, even though he would earn it in like 99% of uplink games, whereas Karma, who was better with the camo, would only earn it in like, say, 80% of games. And if you're having a really good game, your better player, as in the assault rifle who has the better gun and is technically more skilled overall in the game, will give you more opportunities to use camo than the player who is potentially better with it, depending on the role situation. So I thought that was a disappointing aspect of the specialists in Infinite Warfare, that you were better off giving your best specialist to your best player rather than the player who's most skilled with it. Now there's some potential solutions to this. I think one of them would be to, instead of having the specialist be earned, you give the specialist usage to the player X amount of times per game, and they can use it when they like. So for example, camo, which is pretty strong, maybe you can only use it once for the entire map, but you can use it whenever you want, right at the start if you wish. For something that's slightly less good, like an FTL jump, instead of having the cooldown be less, just have it be used more times per game. So the FTL jump, maybe you could use it 3-4 times. Obviously you would have to have a small cooldown on FTL jump, so you couldn't just spam it 3 times in a row and go halfway across the map. But I think that might be a better solution to what we currently have, because there's already no skill gap in earning the specialist, so maybe just let it be available to ensure that the player who's most skilled with it actually gets to use it, and that's the most effective strategy, because I think that's more entertaining for us to watch at home and helps with the actual competitiveness of the game. So in terms of a skill gap in using the specialist, we have to talk about the specialists themselves. A lot of the power weapons are just weapons. I don't really have too much of a problem with upgraded power weapons. You earn it by a number of points, especially in the Infinite Warfare system, which is much better than the Black Ops 3 one. The Black Ops 3 system, you would earn it over time regardless, whereas Infinite Warfare, it never went up by time, only by score, which was much better. For example, in Search and Destroy, the enemy team could see that, oh, he has this many points and that's their camo player. I know whether he's got camo this round, so you can adapt and prepare in that sense. So having it just earned on number of points, I think is very good for the upper echelon of teams, because they can actually adapt and prepare around weapons when they know that the enemy has them. Whereas the time-based situation from Black Ops 3 made things very dodgy, so I hope they don't bring that back. So weapons, as I say, I don't have too much of a problem with, because when you die, you lose your weapon, and both teams have access to the weapon if they wanted to. I think that's a big factor, that if you die and you mess up your chance, you lose the gun. Something that other specialists don't have, and I think that's a big problem with them as we go through this list. So let's start off with Ruin. So the weaponry is listed at the bottom. We'll talk about the equipment in a second. The Grav Slam, just like the gravity spikes from Black Ops 3, don't really have too much of a problem with that. As long as it's balanced in terms of how many points it requires to achieve, or as I would prefer it, how many times you could use it per game, then I don't think the weapons are too much of an issue. The Annihilator on Seraph, the Purifier, the War Machine on Battery, we'll talk about Recon in a second. Scroll down a little bit to Prophet, the Tempest. So the Tempest, the War Machine, the Purifier, the Annihilator, and the Grav Slam, those are just weapons. As long as they're balanced correctly in terms of how powerful they are and how quickly you can attain them, I don't think there's too much of a problem there. There are definitely some problems in terms of the other equipment though, when you talk purely about competitive viability. So Recon, Vision pulse the map to reveal all the enemies for yourself and your teammates. Now okay, you might say, well there's a counter to this, you can wear Cold-Blooded or whatever the equivalent perk is, and both teams have access to it so there's no problem. You could say the same thing about the UAV. Okay, we allow the UAV, we also allow Ghost. There's a counter to the UAV, what are you complaining about? Both teams can use it, what's the problem? The big problem here is, just like the problem with the UAV is, it doesn't take any skill to use it. You call it in, and it shows all your teammates where the enemies are in Black Ops 4. Black Ops 3 only showed yourself, so maybe there actually could have been some communication required and some sort of skill gap, whereas in Black Ops 4, no skill gap at all. You call it in, all your teammates can see where the enemies are on certain pulses. The only skill gap in using it is when, just like with a UAV. Now we go on to Torque. He has this barricade, reinforced cover for protection while securing objectives. Built-in microwave field slows and damages enemy. You know, I don't want to go into too much details on each of these specialists, but the fact that you can have movable cover that completely changes the potential layout of the map and how Treyarch has designed it is a pretty big issue for me. And I believe if you die, the barricade still stays in place. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the case, I think there are some issues here. Now, Crash has a really interesting one. The TAC-5, which heals and boosts enemies' max health for the user and their team. This makes gunfights super unpredictable and random. Yes, when the max health gets boosted, you can actually see the little yellow on their health bar, but say you're pre-aiming a corner, someone comes round and on the other side of the map, the guy happens to activate his health boost, this guy jumps up to 200 health and you lose the gunfight. Anything messing with health, in my opinion, is very problematic in Call of Duty. When you engage a gunfight, you should know how many bullets it's going to take to kill the guy. I think this needs some sort of tweaking at the very least. Now, Ajax, he has this ballistic shield. This is just ridiculous. He holds it in front of himself, he has a pistol that's showing through it, and not only can you not shoot him, but he can shoot you back. Anything which protects you from damage, but yet you can still shoot them, frankly ridiculous. I'd be interested to hear anyone who thinks otherwise in the comments. Now, Nomad, he calls in an attack dog which just rolls around and kills people. It's the same sort of thing as earlier. Okay, maybe there's a skill gap in when to use it most effectively, but in actually achieving the kills, there's almost no skill gap at all. The dog just runs around and kills the people near you. Anything like that, I am fundamentally against. So now we should move on to the equipment. One of the interesting things about the equipment is you can actually equip it on your class for free. Using a grenade or even a tomahawk costs 1 point in your pick 10, whereas you can use the specialist equipment of your specialist of choice for free. So I think first of all that needs to be raised to at least 1 point to match up with the grenades. You don't want to raise the grenades down to 0 because then you'd have probably crazy nade spam. But at least make the equipment worth 1 point, because often these equipments are way more powerful than what the grenades are, but yet you get them for less points. So there's definitely some balance issues here. Now the grapple gun, don't have too many problems with this. This could be like the glitch FTL jump equivalent, which is pretty cool and could make for some really cool plays. I'm excited to see what the pros do with this one if they do elect to equip it. I do have some issues with the timing it would create. For example, in S&D, you can grapple off a load of walls and get a huge advantage on the map as if you were using overdrive from Black Ops 3. And it's difficult for the other team to prepare or adapt for that. So I think something I've suggested a couple of months ago would be to introduce like a 15-second timer from the start of the round on using the grapple gun so you don't get any timing issues. Seraph has the tac deploy, which frankly is just absurd. It completely ruins the map flow and the design of it when you can manipulate spawns with a piece of equipment. I feel like that has no place in competitive Call of Duty, and anyone who played the beta would probably attest to that. Now, Firebreak has the reactor core, somewhat similar to Heatwave, but it seems less powerful. The fact that it prevents healing is a bit of an issue, but this is far from the worst out of the equipment list, so I'm just going to brush over this one. Battery has a cluster grenade, a super powerful grenade, way more powerful than the regular ones. If it's balanced with the proper cooldown, then I don't really see too much issue. Now Recon, he has a sensor dart. He can shove it at a wall, and around it has like a motion sensor which it sees the enemies on the map. Once again, it's the same thing. You put it on the wall, there's no skill in attaining the knowledge, everyone on your team gets the knowledge. I really can't see a world where Recon doesn't have to be completely banned from competitive play. Now, Torque has this razor wire, damages and slows down enemies. There really isn't much counter to this. I think it would be okay if he died, it goes away. Once again, there's a skill gap in terms of placing it in the best position, but once you've placed it, it's free reign from there. In a similar way to a claymore will guarantee a kill, the razor wire will almost do the same if you put it on an entrance to a hard point or something like that. I guess you could say that the enemy team should adapt and have something to break the razor wire with, but I'm something of a Call of Duty traditionalist, I guess, and having razor wire in the game really doesn't sit right. So Crash has an assault pack, supplies ammo packs that provide bonus score for taking down enemies. Don't have too much of an issue with this because it to some extent slows down your teammates in order to get this benefit. Ajax has a 9-bang, very strong, just like Battery's cluster grenade, but fundamentally nothing wrong with it. And then Nomad, mesh mine, effectively a trip mine. Yes, as I say, there's a skill gap in placing it down, but actually achieving the kill almost requires no skill at all. So I feel like Nomad also as a character probably has to go. Then we have Prophet. He has this Seeker shock mine. It's not the worst equipment on the list, but it does hunt down enemies and shocks them with some sort of paralysis. You can just drop it on the floor and follow it, and it'll tell you where an enemy is to some extent. Maybe it needs some alterations, but it's not too bad. So like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these specialists should be viable for Black Ops 4? Do any of my arguments make sense, and do you think some of my recommendations might improve the state of the game? Has your opinion changed back and forth? Do you still think specialists should outright be banned, or they should outright be in the game? I do think that some sort of middle ground is better, but I'm definitely leaning towards a middle ground towards the ban as much as possible side. That's not what Treyarch are going to do though. They're going to try and keep things as close as possible to casual play, and I think that might be to the detriment of our esport for another year, but we'll have to see how things play out. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.